Hey, welcome back. So now we're going to finish our week's material by looking at multiplying radical expressions. So first of all, we're going to define what a radical expression is. A radical expression is an algebraic expression containing at least one radical. So the square root of 5 plus 7 is an example of a radical expression. I can have the square root of 5 minus the square root of 11. I could have the square root of x. I could have the square root of x squared and then minus 17 radical y. Or I could add a plus 2 over here. I could have just a square root of a y. There's a lot of things I can do. Basically, a radical expression is an expression that contains at least one radical. So what we're going to do in this video is to multiply radical expressions. It's going to be very similar to what you already know. It's going to combine two things. It's going to combine what you know about multiplication using distributive and FOIL, and it's going to combine that with what you have learned in the last couple weeks about how to multiply and add and combine radicals. So the easiest way to do this is going to be just to look at a number of examples. So here's the first example, the square root of 7 times the quantity of radical 5 minus 2. This is a single term times a binomial, and we know that when we do multiply a single term times any polynomial, we use distributive. So I take radical 7 times radical 5, that's radical 35. And then I take radical 7 times a negative 2, and I get minus 2 radical 7. Okay, let's look at another one. If I take the square root of 5, and then in parentheses I have 5 plus radical 3, I would like you to get some scratch paper, and I want you to pause the video and write down what you think that would equal. The answer to this one is radical 5 times 5, and we write that as 5 radical 5, and then radical 5 times radical 3 plus radical 15. Okay, here's another problem. Please pause the video, work it out on your scratch paper, and then come check your answer. When I multiply 2 radical 2 times radical 5, I multiply the radicals together and get 2 radical 10. For the second term, I get 2 radical 6. Okay, here's another problem. I want to work through this one together because it has something that's a little new. When I multiply this and I use distributive, I multiply the whole numbers and I get 4, and I multiply the radicals and I get 6. Now for the next term, there's a minus, and then 2 times radical 12, because radical 2 times radical 6 is radical 12. Now, I cannot leave this answer like this. You should be able to identify the fact that 2 radical 12 is not simplified. I need to break that radical 12 down. So to do that, we're going to have to do what we did last week in class. I'm going to break this down. Here's my wall. Bring it down and put your minus sign down. This entire expression is already simplified, so I can just bring it straight down, and I've got 4 radical 6. This 2 comes down, but this radical 12 simplifies to radical 4 times radical 3. Radical 4 I know is 3. Radical 3 is as simple as it can get, and I get 2 times 2 is 4. Radical 3. So my answer is actually 4 radical 6 minus 4 radical 3. I cannot combine them because they're not like radicals. That's my final answer. So make sure that when you look at your final answer, if there's something that needs to be simplified, you simplify it. Okay, I have the same problem written down here twice because I want to do it 2 different ways so that you can see the difference. First of all, if I just multiply straight through with the distributive, radical 8 times radical 12 is radical 96. Radical 8 times radical 6 is minus radical 48. Now, as we had in the last problem, I'm going to have to break this down. So I know from where I started that this is radical 8 times radical 12. I'm going to keep going, and I get radical 4 times radical 2, and this one is radical 4 times radical 3. I know the square root of 4 is 2. I don't know the square root of 2. I know the square root of 4 is 2. I don't know the square root of 3. Altogether, I get 4 radical 6. Okay, so now here's my wall and my plus sign. Now we have to do the same thing on the other side. The square root of 48 is radical 6 times radical 8. I break this down and get radical 2 times radical 3. This is radical 2 times radical 4. Looks like I've got a couple buddies. They will go together to give me a 2. I still have the radical 3, and I know the square root of 4 is 2. So this turns out to be 2 times 2, which is 4, times radical 3. So my answer is 4 radical 6 plus 4 radical 3. Now, notice what happened up here. I spent some brain power multiplying that to get 96, but then I turned around and I broke it right back again. Same with the 6 and the 8 getting us 48. So an option here would be to do this. I'm going to multiply those together, but looking ahead, I'm thinking I'm probably going to have to break those down. So instead of multiplying them and using my brain power to do that, I'm just going to leave it like this, radical 8 times radical 12. Now I'm going to put my minus sign and do my next multiplication. This one's a little easier. I know 6 times 8 is 48 without really having to think about it much, but I also know that I'm going to have to break that down again, so I might as well just leave it as radical 8 times radical 6. And from here, it's going to look the same as the problem over on the left. Okay, I worked this one out and I got the same answer as I did over to the left, but I do need to make a comment. When I was writing it down before, I had that as a plus. That is a minus because this is a minus. So I get the same answer for both. What I want you to see here is that this step right here really didn't help us out a whole lot. Instead of actually, especially if these are large numbers, if they're small and you can just do them really quickly in your head, that's fine. But if they're large numbers, instead of multiplying them, you can just write them as the product of the radicals. If you look at that and know that, boy, I'm going to have to break those down, so I might as well not spend the time and the energy to multiply them together in the first place. Okay, I've got two binomials, so here's our friend FOIL again. Here's my f. Radical 2 times radical 5 is radical 10. My o is radical 2 times radical 3. That's radical 6. My I is negative radical 3 times radical 15. That's minus radical 15. And then my L, hey, those are buddies. I can either write minus radical 9, but since they're buddies, I can just write minus 3. Now, if you look at these radicals, they are as simple as they can be. If that's the case, then this is your final answer. Let's do another one. Okay, here's another FOIL problem. I'd like you to pause the video, work it out on some scratch paper, and then come back. Okay, here's my f. 2 times 3 is 6. My o, 2 times negative 2 radical 5 is negative 5 radical 5. My I is 3 radical 5. And then my L, notice I've got buddies, but I also have that 2 there. So I write the 2 down, and my buddies give me 5. So this is actually going to be a minus 10. Now, if I rewrite it, 6 minus 4 radical 5 plus 3 radical 5 minus 10, you'll notice I've got some like terms to deal with. I've got 6 minus 10, that's negative 4, and then I've got a negative 4 radical 5 plus 3 radical 5, That's a minus 1 radical 5. So there's the answer. Always make sure you combine like terms if you can. Alright, now I have a binomial that's being squared. Now you should remember that when we square a binomial, it's a simple matter of writing it down twice and using FOIL. So when I do that, my F, those are buddies, so I get 3. My O is minus 7 radical 3. Same with my I, minus 7 radical 3. And then my L is plus 49. So when I combine my 3 and my 49, I get 52, and then minus 14 radical 3. And there's our answer. Alright, here we have two binomials, but they're identical except for one's a plus and one's a minus. So you should expect that when we get done multiplying, I would have the difference of squares. Well, let's see what happens. Here's my F, those are buddies, and they give me 5. My O is plus 3 radical 5, and my I is minus 3 radical 5. So they cancel each other out just as we would expect. And then I get minus 9. So this is my F, and this is my L. These two are going to cancel out. But notice what happens when I combine 5 minus 9, I get negative 4 as my answer. Now that's something that is going to be very helpful down the road, because when I multiply two binomials like this times each other, what happens is my answer will end up being just an integer or a whole number. There won't be any more radicals, because the radicals will have either been squared as buddies, or they've canceled each other out because they were in the O or the I term. Alright, here's a binomial that has variables and radicals in each of the two binomials. I'd like you to pause the video, try and work it out, and then come back and check your answer. When you multiply through by FOIL, you get 4 terms. None of them are like radicals or like terms, so there's the answer right here. Now just be cautionary in how you multiply. Remember that only radicals can get multiplied with radicals, like the radical 2 and the radical 3 give me a radical 6. Don't multiply whole numbers or integers with radicals. They must stay on the outside. Anything that's not under a radical needs to stay outside of the radical. Okay, I'm going to put one more problem up here, and I'd like you to try that one. Okay, before you get started on that, I want to give you a little bit of a hint to get started. I've got a single term, a monomial, then a binomial, then a binomial. Now you have your choice. You could either multiply through the first binomial times 3 by 3 radical 2, or you could multiply using FOIL first. It doesn't make a whole lot of difference, but just so that we're all doing the same thing for this particular problem, why don't you take the two binomials and multiply them together first, and then multiply through by the 3 radical 2. So I'm going to do it in pieces. I want you to go ahead on your scratch, pause the video, on your scratch paper. I want you to multiply the two binomials and then start the video again. Alright, here are the 4 terms you get when you do FOIL. Now notice this radical 18. I looked at that and I knew it could be simplified, so I came over to the side and simplified it to 3 radical 2. Now your job is to go all the way through with the 3 radical 2 and get your final answer. So pause the video again and finish the problem. Okay, I want to just point out a few things along the road here. I multiplied through by the 3 radical 2. The first term gave me 18 radical 2, and the second term gave me 3 radical 2 times 30. I could have written 3 radical 60. That would have been okay, but I decided just to leave the radicals separate because I was thinking that there was a 2 embedded in this 30, so I was going to need to break that down and get the buddies. So 3 times 2, I get 6 radical 15. Over here, be careful, the 3's, don't think of them as buddies because they're not under radicals. 3 times 3 is just 9. the radical 2's are buddies, they give me a 2, and that's where the 18 comes from. Now for the last one, I was thinking ahead a little bit, and I know that there's a radical 2 here and a radical 15, but if I think ahead, that radical 15 is going to break down to radical 3 and radical 5, which is not going to help me with the radical 2. So I just went ahead and multiplied it out to radical 30, because I know from up here, radical 30 was pretty much as simple as it could get. So here are my 4 terms, and here's my final answer.